Hey there, everybody. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us this afternoon for today's webinar. I'm very excited to be here. As Jack said, my name is Michael Watkins, and I've been working with the server product since way back in NT 3.5.1. And with each new release of a Microsoft Server operating system, there's always that anticipation. What are they going to do? What are they going to build into it? Are they going to take care of the concerns that I had? How much better is it going to be? Well, if you happen to see my blog post that came out just the other day, you know that there is a lot to love about Windows Server 2016. And in this webinar, I want to take you through just a few of these things. And let me set the expectation right up front. In 30 minutes, we can't dive real deep. That's what the classes are all about. But what we do want to do is give you a real taste of what's changed and what to look forward to. And hopefully you're going to be excited when this is over. You're going to go out, you're going to grab a copy of the newest release candidate for Windows Server 2016, get that loaded in your test environment and start playing with it yourself. So what do I love about it? Well, I love Nano Server, and that's the one thing that people seem to be talking about a ton. And we're going to go in, I'll show you a little bit about Nano Server. We'll talk about why this is a new and interesting option here in the Windows Server lineup. A little bit different than Core, a lot different than the GUI-based environment. Another thing that you're hearing a lot about is containers. If anybody out there is from the Linux world, you may have played with something like Docker previously. And as Microsoft releases Windows Server 2016, containers are going to be all the rage. You remember that movie Fletch when he goes, it's all about ball bearings these days? Well, now it's sort of all about containers, especially if you're building web-based applications. There's a ton going on with these, and containers are a great way that we can isolate those applications from the rest of the operating system. Now, Microsoft's been in the virtualization game a very, very long time. And with that, they've had a nice product with Hyper-V. But in 2016, they're really stepping up their game here. They're going to have some great enhancements in there for security and identification. And I want to tell you a little bit about those as we get deeper into the presentation. Another area that Microsoft really seems focused on, and they started down this path back in 2012 really in earnest, and that was the notion of virtualization of storage. And here in 2016, they've really turned an eye toward this with Storage Direct and Storage, you'll hear it called QoS. I'm a Cisco guy as well. We call it QoS. It's quality of service, and it's a great way for us to decide where that storage bandwidth, capability, flexibility is going to within those items that take advantage of our storage clusters. So we'll talk about that in this presentation as well. And then through this, I want to encourage you to chat in your questions, and we'll have a little bit of time at the very end to go over those and try to answer a few things here on air as well. Anything we don't get to during the course of today's webinar, I'm more than happy to respond to you and make sure that all those questions get answered. So the first thing that we need to understand is with Windows Server 2016, there's a brand new flavor of operating system. As I mentioned to you, it's called the Nano Server. And I don't want to tip my hand too much here and talk a whole lot about Nano Server because we're going to get into that. But it is new. It's a headless operating system, kind of like Core, but it's going to be a little bit different than that. Core's not gone anywhere. There's still Server Core, just like we had in Windows Server 2012 and R2. That's still there. And of course, for those who love the GUI and like the mouse, don't worry, you don't have to panic. They are going to have a flavor here that has the desktop experience as well. So there's 3 different flavors. They each fulfill a certain purpose in your enterprise. And we're going to be talking about that as we go along as well. So at the bottom here, I've gone ahead and put a link for you, and you'll see this in the recording. Don't worry, you don't have to scroll it out now real fast. But this is where you can go out and you can grab the current technical preview. It's Technical Preview 4. You can download this on your systems and start playing with Windows Server 2016. Now, Microsoft's going to be releasing the actual product later this year, but this is a great way by playing with these technical previews to get your kind of your big toe in the water, to get a sense of what's there for you, and to start to understand some of the new capabilities that you're going to have to take advantage of here in the product. So the first of those is the Nano Server. So why did Microsoft develop this notion of the Nano Server? They had Core. Wasn't that kind of good enough? Well, with Nano Server, it's a headless 64-bit only version of server, and that's not the end of the story. Now, let me back up. Headless, that just means no GUI. It's what they're calling it these days. And if you thought Core really kind of introduced a brave new GUI-free world, well, Nano Server kicks that up a notch here because it's actually a purpose-built version of the operating system. And by purpose-built, I mean that unlike Core, which when you install Core, you get all the binary, everything that you could ever want, and you may choose to use certain roles or other roles you may not use. When you deploy Nano Server, you have to understand what it is that you want to do. So like I said, there's no GUI interfaces at all. You can do remote administration. We'll talk about that. Of course, you can use PowerShell as well. But really the key is, at the time of deployment, you have to decide how you're going to use the Nano Server in your environment. Now, the good news, because it doesn't bring along all the different roles and features and binaries and everything, even if you don't deploy them, they're sitting there in your core image. With Nano, you decide when you get ready to deploy this, what the server is going to do for you. And really the place that you want this to be is in your fabric. So it's a purpose-built operating system that's based on packages. And when this comes out, it's going to have more packages than it does right now. But there's a number of packages that are available in there currently. And we'll talk a little bit about those as we go along. Where it has its strength is when it's going to fulfill that kind of compute, storage, failover capability in the fabric of your environment. So let's say, for instance, you want to run something like a homegrown application, maybe for invoicing or something like that. That might be something that would go on a Nano Server. You want to run DNS, Nano Server's your guy. You want to run Exchange, Nano Server is not what you want. It's not going to be the environment for running that. So you need to decide what it is you're going to do as you do it. Now, in deploying Nano Server, it's going to be a little bit different. And I toyed with the notion of going through all the steps and everything with you, and I thought, oh my gosh, we just don't have time for that. So I wanted to give you an MSDN article here. There's a link on screen you can see, and this will be up in the recording as well. This is the deployment guide for Nano Server, because when you deploy Nano Server, you're going to specifically decide what it is you want, and you can create some customizations as you go along. Like I said, when you do that deployment, you're going to base this on a series of packages. So when you actually deploy, you say, I want a package that's going to do this or do that. For instance, whether it's packages for creating a Hyper-V host server, for creating file server. Maybe you want to do file, failover clustering. We can do that as well. Reverse forwarders, there's a package for that. There aren't packages at this point for things like Active Directory. And I really don't think there probably will be, but we will see this list of packages added to as we go along. Now, when it comes to administering your Nano Server, you've got the kind of core PowerShell and WMI capabilities. You've got PowerShell, that you can go in and do your installation with, that you can do customizations with. You've got your Hyper-V manager that you can use from a remote standpoint. Failover cluster manager, again, from a remote standpoint, server manager, Perfmon, all of those tools that maybe you've been using in administering the core servers that you have in your environment can be used with the Nano Server as well. So though there's not a GUI, that doesn't mean you can't use these very familiar GUI-based tools to help you out along the way. Now, that's Nano Server, and trust me, we just scratched the surface. But I want you to be excited about it, and I want you to download and play with this yourself. You're going to have fun. You can build Nano Servers extremely quickly, and they've got a very, very tiny footprint. So rolling them out is going to be fast. They reduce the number of reboots. I think it's going to be a great addition for Microsoft and for you in your data centers. Another big thing that's in this new build is something called a container. And depending on how close you are in the DevOps world, maybe you've heard more about containers than not. But the notion here is, and maybe you've even thought this, wouldn't it be great if you could sort of package everything together that an application needs in one nice, tidy little box, and then isolate that from everything else that's running on your server? Well, if you've ever thought that, guess what? They owe you a royalty. You already thought of what a container would be. A container is just simply an environment where your application can run without impacting any of the other things that are happening on the system. And the system can go about its business without impacting your application as well. And here in Windows Server 2016, there's a couple of different types of containers that I want to tell you about as well. But the notion is, you can see here on screen from the architecture, it's really an isolated runtime environment for any of those hosted applications. And as you move to things like private cloud, for instance, this becomes more and more important. And what it does is when you create a container, it packages up all of those dependencies that an application has. Maybe it's services, it's libraries. In fact, you can go in and configure the type of CPU, the number of CPUs, the amount of memory, the amount of storage, all those sorts of things get packaged together in that very tiny little container environment specific for that application. And then the container engine is this terrific lightweight virtualization tool that's going to allow you to isolate all of those dependencies from every other application by simply sealing those off into a virtual container. Now, everything runs pretty much like it would if you were running on a full version of the operating itself. So the container, it runs, it's this sort of isolated process in the same space on the host operating system. So it's sharing the kernel, it's sharing the same kernel that all the other containers are. Now that's for a Windows container, a Windows Server container. We're going to talk about a different type here in just a moment. But that gives you just kind of a basic feel of containers. And in the Microsoft world here with Windows Server 2016, they've created a couple of different types of what are called container runtimes. The first is what I was describing to you a moment ago. This became available if you were one of the folks who downloaded and been following sort of the technical previews. This Windows Server container first came out in Technical Preview 3. And if you want to play with it, it's certainly there in Technical Preview 4, and they've rolled out our Hyper-V containers as well. So with a Windows Server container, you've got a shared base operating system. It's very scalable. It's very resource efficient. And it's terrific if you're in something like a trusted multi-tenant environment, private cloud type of environment, something like that. Let's say, on the other hand, though, you want a higher level of isolation. Well, that's where a Hyper-V container comes in. And a Hyper-V container, it's an alternate, kind of an alternative to our Windows Server container, and it's got an extra level of isolation here that's terrific for certain types of workloads. Like maybe you've got a highly regulated environment, or you're in a shared hosting environment, something like that, where you've got multiple applications from multiple tenants, and maybe a public multi-tenancy environment. Hyper-V containers are built specifically for that. They're going to use a little bit more resources, a little bit more, CPU, a little bit more memory, this sort of thing. But you're going to get a much better level of isolation. Now, the neat thing here is that whether you're running a Windows Server container or a Hyper-V container, they can both use the same underlying image. And let's say that you're working in a DevOps role, you could allow your developers to create an underlying image that's perfect for their particular application, and then you can decide how you want to roll this out. Do you want to put it in a Windows Server container? Do you want to put it in a more isolated Hyper-V container? So you're going to get all sorts of control in this environment. Now, earlier on I mentioned something called Docker. And Docker comes to us from the Linux world. It's really where containers got their start and got their popularity here. And in Windows Server 2016, there's an integration with Docker. And Docker is just an open source engine. It's going to automate the deployment of any of your applications. It creates that container for you like what we've been describing. And Microsoft's entered into a partnership with Docker so that you can run Dockerized applications in your Microsoft environment and vice versa. And there's a great tool out there called the Docker Hub. It's a huge collection of these open and curated applications that you can download and work with. And Microsoft, with this integration, is looking for a much more collaborative role here with our friends, our brethren, if you will, in the Linux side of the world. So I've gone ahead and I've put a link here for you for Docker Hub. Like I said, it's a big collection of different types of applications. If you're setting up a test server, if you want to play with containers, you might go out, grab a couple of these as well, see how that works in your environment, and if there are capabilities that may be of assistance to you as well. Now, Microsoft's been in the virtualization game for a long time. Containers are new, Nano Server's new. Virtualization, that's not new. What's so exciting? What's so sexy about virtualization in 2016? Well, Microsoft has recognized that there have been some problems, if you will. The Hyper-V product, it's a terrific product. There are others out there, VMware, Citrix, things like that. But what Microsoft recognized when they looked at virtualization, they said, well, if we're going to really get serious about virtualization, we've got to get much more serious about security, and we have to get more serious about legitimacy. And that's really what they've addressed here in this latest update of the server product. And the first thing that they did is they introduced something called the Host Guardian service. Now, to understand kind of what role this plays, I want to step you through, kind of a what if you will, here. So the notion would be, what if, you like the bad guy there in green, what if a bug or a hacker seized control of the particular host OS? Well, if they have control of the host OS, if they have the administrator credentials, well, they can make a quick hop into any of our guest virtual machines. Wouldn't it be great if we could isolate those in a way that they're protected, that they're secure, so that even if somebody does hack into the system and maybe they pull out a VHD and they say, okay, I'm going to take that home. I'm going to just pound away on this. As it is right now, with enough time and enough resources, you could break into that. You could get into it. You could get into the Active Directory. You could get into everything. Microsoft looked at this and said there's got to be a better way to do this. And they introduced something called the Host Guardian service. And what this does is it allows us to create a guarded fabric. So we can do a couple of things. We can block that type of attack we were talking about a moment ago. But we can also decide what hosts are actually legitimate hosts, and we can certify them to run as shielded tenant virtual machines. Now, this is going to leverage software-based TPM, and it's going to leverage BitLocker, and we'll talk about this in a moment here. But the notion is we want to secure that environment so much that if someone were to do what I described to you a moment ago, get that VHD, peel it off that initial host, take it outside of our environment or even to a different host within the environment and try to get it to run, try to crack into it, it's not going to work. The infrastructure service is going to help you to lock this down, and it's something that you're going to build in your systems right from the very beginning, this notion of the Host Guardian service. It's a terrific service that Microsoft has, and it's really going to increase the capabilities that they have here with their virtualization as far as being able to make things more secure, to lock those applications down. And these are lessons, what we're seeing in Windows Server 16. We're seeing them put into practice lessons that they've learned from all their years of rolling out and administering the Azure cloud. And so now we're seeing a lot of that make its way back into the server operating system itself. Now, as part of this Host Guardian service, there's the notion of the shielded virtual machine. And what this is a BitLocker enabled virtual machine. So all the data and the state of that shielded VM, those are going to be protected against inspection, protected against theft, protected against any kind of tampering, whether that's from malware, whether that's from a data center administrator, whether that's from a hacker. The neat thing about these shielded virtual machines is that they only run in fabrics that are designated as the owner of that particular virtual machine. So we can't move it elsewhere and get it to run because it'll need to be, it's going to be encrypted by BitLocker. So that makes sure that you can't break into it, that you can't be able to run it in this way. One thing cool that Microsoft has for us here is they're going to make it very easy for us to take our existing virtual machines and we can convert them into shielded virtual machines into Windows Server 2016. So it's really a great tool for helping to secure our environment and to really step up their game with regard to virtualization. Now, something else Microsoft's been doing for a while is this notion of software-defined storage. But in Windows Server 2016, they're really taking that to a whole new level as well. And they're doing this in tight integration with System Center as well. And maybe you've played with this. You've played with their existing software-defined storage in Windows Server 2012 R2. Maybe you've played with System Center 2012 R2 and this sort of thing. But they're really taking it to a new level here with something that they call Storage Spaces Direct. And with these, Microsoft's providing a software-defined storage or kind of a private cloud, if you like, if you do anything on the private cloud side. And they're using industry-standard servers as well as local storage to help you to create this. With Storage Spaces Direct, this is a brand new feature in Windows Server 2016. And it's really an extension of their existing software-defined storage stack that's in our Windows Server 2012. And what this is going to do, it's going to leverage storage space technology across all the various nodes in a cluster in one of two different ways. It can do this by using the disks internal to the nodes in the cluster, or it can directly do this by directly attaching those nodes in a cluster to some kind of an enclosure, if you will. And that's going to allow our operating systems drives to from everything from JBOD on up to be used on multiple machines, but they're going to all present as a single line. So all you have to do is just add nodes to add storage. So it's a very easy and straightforward way to do this. And Storage Spaces, what it does when we do this is it aggregates all the disks to a cluster node, and it creates what's called a storage pool. It's going to be made up of those disks, and then the virtual disks that are created as part of that storage pool, those can be used as clustered shared volumes, or CSVs, to house things like our virtual machines and things like that that are running on REFS, a resilient file system. So if we've got VMs that are running on an REFS formatted volume, we can take advantage of this sort of thing. Now, there's a couple of different ways that you can deploy these. We can deploy this so that, I'm going to see if I can get my pen tool here to work well with this, and see if we can. We can deploy these so that, oh, that's going to be not pretty at all. Let me see if I can change that out. Hello. Okay, let's do red. There we go. So we can deploy these so that all of our compute and our storage, I'll just use CNS for simplicity's sake here. This would be one type of deployment. All of our compute and storage resources, these are all together. And these are all of our compute, all of our storage, they're scaled, they're all managed together. And typically this is going to be for a kind of a smaller deployment. The other way to do this is very similar to kind of what we saw just a moment ago, where our compute and our storage are separate. And so we manage them, managed independently. All right, so they're managed independently, and they're also scaled out independently as well. And typically we'll use this for a larger scale deployment where we want to have greater control in the environment itself. Another big advance in the storage world for Microsoft is something you'll hear called Storage QoS, or Storage QoS. The notion of this is they wanted to create something that would really address workloads inside of an environment that are attempting to maybe use more than their fair share of resources. So Microsoft created this notion of Storage QoS with rate limiters and a policy manager to allow you to specifically decide how your storage should be apportioned on the fly to the particular resources here. So as you can see in this diagram, we've got our I/O scheduler here working in tandem with a policy manager, taking on policies that you set. It's then going to interact with our Hyper-V cluster, and out there on the cluster we have rate limiters. So by setting policies in place, we can determine how all of this can be used, how all of our storage can be used as we go along, all through this centralized policy management tool within Windows Server 2016. Now, out of the box, there's a lot of things that this can do, and it can also, of course, whoops, sorry, bounced forward there, and it can also be customized greatly as well. Typically, you're going to be using this in a virtual machine manager environment. So this is another place where we get that, kind of increased power by wrapping together our System Center products with our server product to give us greater control of our virtual storage environment. Now, Microsoft has been focused for quite some time on virtualization. They're focused on storage. And really what that's leading up to is this notion of software-defined networking. And as a Microsoft administrator, you've probably been used to managing users and Active Directory and security and resource security and things like that. As you see from what we've been talking about so far, Microsoft's putting a lot more tools in your hand. So in your environment, the storage guys used to manage storage. Well, you're going to have much greater capability to do that. in this environment. The DevOps guys may have managed containers in the Linux world. You're going to have the ability to do that. And in the networking world, of course, we had our network engineers who managed our disks and our routers and our switches and things like that. Microsoft now moves us forward in this version of Windows Server 2016 into the brave new world of software-defined network. Other vendors are going there. Cisco is going there with their 9K, with their ACI, this sort of thing. But nobody has quite the package that Microsoft has here, through things like the storage spaces, the storage QoS, and packaging that all together into interfaces that just make this really exciting for us. So with regard to software-defined networking, we have here kind of this integration of System Center. Let me go ahead and show you this, allowing us to take advantage of a number of different services for NAT, for VPN, for routing reflectors, for load balancers, for third-party applications, for service channeling, for our firewall. All of those pieces are now brought together in Microsoft's vision of software-defined networking, and they're going to put the power for controlling that really in your hands as a Windows administrator. So they're really flattening the data center, if you will, and flattening those roles between the network guy, the storage guy, the Windows guy, and really putting a lot of that under your domain, under your power. So the way they're doing that is through network function virtualization. And if you've worked in System Center or if you've built Microsoft private clouds before, then you already know about some of the Microsoft virtualization capabilities. And these are really just taken to a whole new level here in Windows Server 2016. With this, Microsoft has a whole series of network services that are provided through the Windows Server operating system. The gateways, the software-defined load balancers, the site-to-site gateways. And you have the capability of deploying these various virtual appliances, even from vendors outside of Microsoft as well, to meet all of your various needs. And we know that Microsoft has a number of these different functions built in. They also now give you that ability to deploy the virtual appliances from any of the vendors that you may be currently working with. That could be a Linux vendor. This could be other vendors in the world that you're taking advantage of. And you can deploy and configure these through what's called the network controller. And I've got a slide about that here in a moment. But that's really the big advance, this notion of putting everything under your control as a Windows Server administrator and allowing you to create true software-defined networking, all resting on things like your Hyper-V hosts and SOS. So with our network controller, and this is what's really behind this whole software-defined networking, this is a highly available, highly scalable server role that's brand new here in Windows Server 2016. And it's got southbound APIs that are going to allow you to communicate with your network. And so, with these you can do things like you can discover network devices. You can detect server configurations. You can gather all the information that you're going to need about your network. And it's going to give you a pathway for sending that information to your network infrastructure, including any of those configuration changes that you might want to make. And then it also has a whole set of northbound APIs as well that are going to let you communicate with your network controller itself. It's going to give you the ability to gather that network information from the controller, and you can use this then to monitor the network, and you can use it in conjunction with PowerShell, with REST, with System Center VMM, with System Center Operation Manager. And with these, you can manage your Hyper-V virtual machines, all of your virtual switches, your physical network switches, your physical network routers, your firewalls, your firewall software from Microsoft or even other vendors, your VPN gateways, your RF servers, your load balancers, all of this. And this can be deployed if you want to play with it. If you download the current technical preview, you can deploy this on a single virtual machine if you just want to test it out, you want to get your hands on it and see what it's like. Or in a more of a production environment, you're going to deploy this across a 3 physical server or 3 VM host cluster so that you can run your entire network through this software. It's just the most amazing thing. I can't wait for you guys to go out, get your hands on this, and kind of go a little bit deeper. Now, I'm glancing at the clock, and I can't believe it's been 30 minutes already. But we've talked about really 5 key features that are included here in Windows Server 2016. If you're as excited about me, there's a lot here to get in, roll up your sleeves, get your hands dirty, and get ready for Microsoft to bring this to market a little bit later this spring. And so hopefully this got you excited, it got you interested, and hopefully it gets you thinking about pulling down the latest release of Windows Server 2016 for yourself and putting it in your environment, at least in a test way, to start to get your hands wet and see what you can do with this incredible new operating system that Microsoft has. So anyway, my name is Michael Watkins. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to attend this webinar with us here today. If you want to get in touch with me, all my contact information is up there. You can take a look at my LinkedIn. You can take a look at our Twitter, Facebook. You can connect with me in any of these ways. And, of course, I'm active in our CBT Nuggets communities as well. So I want to thank you so much, Jack, for putting this together, and thank everybody for taking the time to join us today. We look forward to seeing you as we roll out our Windows Server 2016 classes later this year.
Thank you very much, Michael, and we are so excited to see that new series on Windows Server 2016. Thank you for this great webinar. You threw a lot of information at us. I know that most of our attendees are extremely excited. We had a bunch of questions. For the attendees, we will get to your questions later today. Also, we will have the recording posted on our blog later today. Just look for it probably after the end of business. This has been a great webinar. I thank you all for joining us today, and we'll see you on the next one.